All right. Hey, everybody. This is Jon Croft from Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. I am Jon Croft, and this is Rebecca Croft. How are you, Rebecca?
Hi,
Hi.
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. We returned from our strange trip, escaping Milton and to
Which,
returning
which
home
is
to
a
find,
hurricane.
yes, returning home to find that our house is still here. It wasn't like Wizard of Oz and our house is Nope. Our house is still here. We're okay. A lot of people nearby did not fare so well. A lot, actually, Helene, everybody said Milton was going to be worse than Helene for the Tampa Bay area, and thank God we had prayed specifically for a cold front to come down and knock Milton off its course, and prevent the worst flooding in the history of Tampa Bay that we've ever seen. And thank God it did that. Instead, those poor souls from Sarasota got it. And but they are more inland, so they're not damaged as badly as we would have been. At least I don't think so. I'm sure there's exceptions. There's an island out there. I think it's called Siesta Key or something. That was really badly damaged. It was like underwater and stuff. So places like that got hit really badly. Thankfully, my dad didn't get hit again like he did during Debbie, which was before Helene. Um, and he got a tree through his roof. He's still waiting for the insurance to kick in, and so we are okay. But we had to move a lot of our valuables, pack them all up because we thought we might get bad flooding. They said it could be like 10 foot of storm surge, which would probably be put our house about 5 foot underwater. So thankfully that did not happen. We did not, flooding went up to our house, but did not get into our house. So there was like this line of like junk on our driveway that was revealing exactly how far the flooding went. And it almost went up to our house. So it was kind of
Yeah,
like, wow, thank God.
yeah,
But a lot of friends of ours, as a lot of friends of ours, I won't mention them, but some people are considering moving.
Mm.
Their house got thousands and thousands of dollars of damage. Multiple friends this happened to. Um, so God bless those people. I hope that they don't move, but we love them and they do move. We understand. Um, but yeah, like we even were like resigned. We were like, weren't we, honey? We were like, uh,
yeah,
we might be moving after this. Who knows?
yeah.
Uh,
We really thought we were gonna lose a lot
mm,
because we had just seen our friends. One friend lost everything, and then another friend lost a lot of stuff just from flooding and you know the wind. And
yeah,
we just thought that's a possibility. We visually saw it with our own eyes. We saw this happen to our friends, so.
yeah,
We
multiple
usually
times.
don't get that concerned with hurricanes. I don't know. There's usually just a lot of drama surrounding it, but this one was different. It really
Yeah,
seemed like it was headed straight for us. And
it really
so
did.
we packed up all the things that mattered to us, which
Yeah,
was really interesting to see what we could live without and
it
what we weren't
was.
going to grab. Yeah, what will you not grab when you're running out the door to escape a hurricane?
Yeah, the stuff you thought you would need and grab, and the stuff you would
Yeah.
on a daily basis go, oh, this is really important to me. But then later you're like, eh,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, there was like you were talking about pictures, how you're glad you saved those pictures. A
Yeah.
lot of those things I will let go,
Yeah.
personally, but some of them I won't. It's true.
Hmm.
Um, and I actually was very careful with my film equipment
Yeah.
because in my mind, I'm like preparing for a film. I need
Yeah.
this in the next year. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of stuff you could replace, but if like you've been gathering equipment for this project for the next year, it's like, well, I'm planning on doing this film. I don't care if my whole life gets flooded. I still plan on doing it. So, um, it's just one of those things, you know. I stored, I could not bring all that stuff with me to Tallahassee, so I stored it in my other car, which I left here. And cars can survive a lot of flooding, at least the inside of them, when a house won't. And plus, it
Yeah.
gives it a few extra feet of height. Quite often, if you're like an SUV or something. And so I stored a lot of it in my other car, and and it was fine. So,
Good.
but yeah, we freshly cleaned out our house. You
Hmm.
know, all this stuff is a little bit exciting, a little bit trepidatious, but a little bit exciting. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we felt very surrendered and we were just like, what's going to happen next?
Yep,
Anything's possible.
anything's possible.
And
Well,
your parents' house was very comfortable and very inviting. So we felt safe.
yes, yes. Even though their house had a tree that went through the roof, it had been plasticed up, taped, and everything, so there was no encroachment,
Yeah.
and and it didn't wasn't a problem, you know.
No.
So we in fact we were like talking about maybe we should move to this house
Hmm.
because my parents are talking about moving away from it, and we're thinking maybe they'll sell it to us. This is in
Yeah.
Tallahassee, so we're thinking maybe we'll end up moving into Tallahassee. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because there's a way that could work for my operation, for my business. Tallahassee is has access to things that we don't have access to down here. So it's more of a university school, more of a university town. So there's young talent um, for filmmaking. There's people I could interview close by in Atlanta and Georgia. People I could interview in Nashville. It's much quicker to get there instead of from where we live now. And you could road trip, which is a lot cheaper. So just more convenient.
Yeah.
But having to fly or having to spend 2 days just to drive somewhere, Florida's a big state. So it adds an extra day to the trip if you're driving. So these were little things where we were like talking about, maybe we could survive, maybe we could do it, you know. Um,
Yeah. And the forest. They have a little mini forest in their
yes,
backyard.
swampy forest.
It was awesome.
Um, the
It was
kids loved it
beautiful.
for sure, but there's like poison ivy everywhere, and it'd be interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to our topics. Of course, we're talking about epic poetry today because one good thing I got to do on all of our driving around is listen to some CDs that I hadn't listened to, like that had been sitting around, and it was talking about epic poetry. It was like a course, kind of an audio course, and they talk about epic poetry. And so a lot of, I don't know all the epic poetry. I know some of it, quite a bit of it, but I don't, more than a lot of people, but I don't know all of it. So like, I had done research on much of this stuff already, but it just provided a little extra context. So we'll be talking about that today, but what kind of media experiences have you been having, Rebecca, this week?
Oh, you asked me.
I did. I wasn't quite sure how to bring it to you. So I'm a little rusty right now.
Well, I get to read amazing books out loud to my children. as part of our
Mhm.
homeschool.
It's awesome.
And this book, is that backwards?
Oh,
So this book
good.
I've been reading to them. It's called Parables from Nature by Mrs. Alfred Gaddy. I don't know why her name is printed like that, but it's it's what it says. It's parables from nature, and we've
Hmm.
read three so far, and they're just short stories basically, and they're really good. The first one was about this caterpillar, and a butterfly comes and says, hey, take care of my eggs for me. I need to go fly, or I need to go, yeah, I need to go migrate and fly away.
What's
And
the
the
name of that
caterpillar,
story again?
let's see, it's the first one in here. It's called A Lesson of Faith.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the caterpillar is like,
Yeah, she says
me?
go and take care of the eggs while I'm gone to the caterpillar, right?
Yeah. So the caterpillar thinks that it's being asked to take care of baby butterflies. And the
Hmm.
caterpillar doesn't think that it's worthy. The caterpillar's like, I'm just a caterpillar. What do I know about flying? And he has no idea that he's going to become a butterfly. He just has no idea.
Yeah.
And so he goes to the bird, and the bird is like wise and heavenly minded. And the bird tells him, guess what? You're going to become a butterfly. So
Hmm.
you're perfectly suited to take care of these baby butterflies, which are actually going to be caterpillars. And the butterfly's like offended, or the caterpillar is offended. Like, how could you say such a thing? A lowly creature like me, there's no way I
Hmm.
would ever become a butterfly. And of course, uh, you know, it eventually figures it out. And but it makes me think of how a lot of times as Christians, we don't see ourselves the way God sees us. And
Yeah.
we don't see ourselves as the new creation. We see ourselves as this very, like, just very, you know, unworthy sinner.
Right.
Um, whereas God is
Or I
like,
couldn't
well,
possibly like give you
yeah,
great stuff. Or I couldn't
whereas,
possibly please God in some way.
right.
Yeah.
Whereas God is like, you have my spirit, like, you are my child, like, you are going to become this something amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so all the stories are really amazing like that.
It's like you don't know what you were made for, but I do. You know?
Yes. Yeah. That was a good one for identity. That really spoke to me. And then of course, as we're evacuating from, thinking that we might lose our house and
Yeah.
that we might have to live somewhere else, the story that I read to my kids was called The Unknown Land,
Hmm.
again from Parables of Nature. And it's the story of these oh, and I can't remember what.
That's the birds one, right?
Yes, yes, the sedge warblers. So,
Yes.
the mother is always singing of the unknown land, and the children are like, what are you singing about? And she says, yeah, we're gonna go there someday. And they're like, why? But where we live is so perfect and beautiful. And she
Hmm.
says, well, there's a voice in your heart that's speaking to you and telling you this is not your rest.
Right.
And that it's time to go to the unknown land. And so that story was really, really beautiful. There was a quote in there from Hebrews, the book of Hebrews.
Mhm.
I believe it's Hebrews 11, verse 16. It says, "But now they desire a better country." And it's speaking of Abraham and his descendants and how they longed for the homeland, the better place, the heavenly homeland, but
Yeah.
also the tangible homeland. And so I just thought they're just all really beautiful. This is good. Like, you could read this to your kids. Read this to your kids. It's very good. It's
Well,
beautiful.
you could say go to Ambleside, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
check out the recommended reading for kids of your of your children's age.
Yes.
There's incredible stuff there. Our kids get an immense amount out of it. And although that's the story that kind of frustrated me, isn't it? We talked about that a little bit because I was like, I think you separated into two or three readings, something like that.
Hmm.
And the first one, I was like, really like, wow, this is really great because they're talking about going to the unknown land and how the child doesn't the chick doesn't really understand. And so it's like teaching them to believe and have faith in the still small voice inside of them, essentially. And I was like, this is great. But what I was imagining, often what I do when I read stories is because the author, sometimes it's because the author doesn't describe things well enough, but sometimes it's actually because they do, is my vivid imagination will actually start to create this imagery, right? And sometimes it starts deviating from the story that I'm being told. And then I have to
Yeah.
pick which one I prefer. Do I prefer my
Yeah.
version of the story or do I prefer
Right.
their version? And I eventually started preferring my version of this story because what I had imagined was that they were in this kind of like war-torn environment. And it's like they knew they were not in the environment for sedge warblers. They knew that this was not a natural environment for them. But as we talked about, you were like, John, remember they're in this nice environment, and they're like, why would you ever leave here anyway? And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, why would they leave? It's such a great place. So what's going on there? And so for me, I think of all these visual aids because I'm thinking in cinematic language, and I'm thinking also I was comparing this story to Pilgrim's Progress, which we can talk about today because we're talking about epic poetry. But
Yeah.
like, what I was thinking of was in the beginning of Pilgrim's Progress, how evangelist talks to Christian and gives him a warning, gives him a vision of like this place is going to be judged and destroyed. And that's why he feels the need to move and leave, right? And to go on this journey, this pilgrimage to the enchanted city, to Never Land, like to heaven, essentially. And so there's actually lots of parallels with Pilgrim's Progress in this story. But this story is a lot, obviously much shorter and very succinct. And I was like, because we love nature and we love birds, and I was just imagining this animated
Mm.
film with
Yeah.
these birds talking to each other, and you have subtitles when they tweet and stuff.
Hmm.
And and the children are trying to, and well, the magpie, right, is giving the chick all this
Doubt.
lying information, like he's like Satan in the garden. So there's this Edenic sort of parallel where the magpie is like Satan and he's like making him doubt in the testimony of his mother, who's like, no, I hear the voice of kindness telling me to go here. And so like the magpie is giving him all this doubt in his mother. And like why why would you believe in that, And
Yeah.
so very much like the Edenic, and also like the Pilgrim's Progress, there's this kind of like doubt that's your where it's about like it's the lesson, right, of the garden. It's the
Yeah.
lesson of believing, God and his voice as opposed to the magpie or the serpent or Satan. So, you know,
Right.
there's some real rich imagery there that I was imagining.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Ambleside,
Yeah.
and so I'll just quickly talk about that. There's a style of homeschooling called Charlotte Mason, and originated in like the 1900s. I'm not exactly, yeah, early 1900s. Um,
Yeah. Which is
and
really 18 somethings, right?
yes, and there's the style is to teach children using living books.
Living books. Love that
rather
term.
than a textbook.
Yes.
So a living book would be a book where you learn something from a story or from the information that's presented in a lively way,
Mm-hmm.
um, or from poetry or from actually experiencing it.
Right.
So
Or
they
a
prefer that.
combination of all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we use that style of homeschool for history and literature.
It's great. It's a very
And you can,
natural, organic way of
yeah,
learning things. Like
lots of
what's the
reading.
practical use of all these things right in front of you? You know,
Absolutely.
and
They
being
call it,
told in the form of a story is just so much more engaging for
it
children
really,
of every age, really. Sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you.
No, it's okay. They call it a feast of ideas. You're giving your child a feast of ideas, and
Hmm.
um, yeah, this book says that it's for children ages 9 and up. But yeah, Ambleside has free lists of books for all different grade levels of kids,
Yeah,
like that.
it's great
Really
stuff.
good stuff. Yeah.
And if you like books, I mean, these are books you'll probably want to own anyway,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
Iliad and the Odyssey and Aesop's
Yeah.
Fables and these great like classic books. And obviously things like the Bible. I need to actually get back with teaching the kids those readings of the Bible.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's Genesis for our young boys. I'm getting into, and
Yeah.
Violet's already done quite a lot of reading.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what media have you been experiencing this week?
Ugh. Yes, I indicated in the title, Shepherds for Sale. I realized it was in our Audible Prime membership. And so I just started listening to it and I was just like blown away by the disturbing accounts that Megan Basham, the author, she actually works at the Daily Wire as well as a journalist, which is how I heard about this book. And also because I'm on Twitter and people, whenever there's a Twitter scandal, you get kind of whiff of it. And so this is one of those books that made the rounds maybe a week or two ago, and people were maybe a month ago even, and people were talking about how oh, it's so unfair for Megan Basham to bash these poor Christian leaders, um, just because they preach things that aren't biblical. Like how could you bash them for that? Like it's absurd. Just the idea that people could find a way to complain about this. I mean, first of all, we're Protestants, so we take issue with lots of things in the church that we don't like. That's kind of the name of the game. We believe in reforming the church. We don't just believe in reforming the Catholic Church. We believe in reforming our own churches. So this is of course something Catholics don't like. They don't want reform, apparently. They think it's bad when we separate into denominations. They think that's weird because they don't like the idea of reform. They don't like the idea of like, oh, if, you know, I guess for them, if they don't like something, they just don't do anything about it. They don't go somewhere else. They don't make us think about it. They don't, I don't I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. Like it's true that you should be able to solve a lot of these issues without having to put 95 theses on the wall. That's true. You should be able to have discussions and work a lot of these things out. It's true. But when you do write a book like Shepherds for Sale, it should also be understood that there might be truths in here that are valid. And so, kind of shunning the light is not a good look when you're supposed to be a teacher of the gospel and of the truth and of God's goodness, you know. So it's a really bad look when people are like, um, you know, uh, don't look over here. No, don't look at the guy behind the curtain, you know. So it's true that you can't like scandalize everybody. That's true. And like scandalizing people is not always the greatest technique, but it's like at a certain point, and if you read the book, you'll understand that we have reached that point where some of these people need to be talked about. Like, you know, so you know, I don't want to get into each example, but she uses examples like teaching highly politicized things in churches, things that are, you know, highly partisan. And it's not so much just teaching it, right? It's about demonizing the other side. So these are the things that I find to be more deplorable. I don't recommend that pastors teach politics from the pulpit. I think that's a bad idea. But I also don't think that it's like evil in some way to do that. But what is wrong, in my view, is to then start demonizing people because they don't hold your politics. I think that's a really bad idea. Um, and it's better to just kind of like talk about things in a spiritual way, such as about your relationship with God. That's the job of the church, right? To shepherd their flock, right? And that means keeping your flock safe from heresies and bad ideas and and helping kind of protect your flock's relationship with God. And so it's about your relationship with God. It's not about your relationship with the state or with the government or with your politics. On the other hand, there are things that um, our governments do that are totally related to our faith because governments can start to think that they have the right to get into everybody's business to such a degree that it can be quite shocking. Like if you believe in any form of Marxism, they in the history of Marxism, they've essentially tried to get rid of religion and make everybody atheist. So if you're a Christian, that should be kind of like frightening to you, right? Just the idea that a government style would like to get rid of your your beliefs. They would just like to erase it. You know, so if there are government styles that believe that, in other words, they don't believe in freedom of religion, well, that's kind of a problem for you, isn't it? So I can understand that Christians at that point can unify very safely against these kinds of philosophies and ideologies that creep into government. And guess what? This book catalogs how so many of these church leaders have espoused Marxist ideas. So it seems entirely contradictory. But when you think about it, it might not be contradictory for them because why? Because they're probably not even Christians. In fact, many of these people who have head up these organizations that fund these quote shepherds for sale, and this is cataloged in the book, many of these organizations that fund them are actually led by atheists and non-Christians. And so this should this is a worthy book for Christians to read because it's when you connect the dots, you know, if you believe in facts and truth, then connecting these dots is pretty important part of that. And when you do that, you see, wait a second, does the devil have a desire to corrupt the church? Well, how's he going to do that if he does do that? Probably through things like this. Give some money to a pastor that's willing to be, you know, move a little bit in their ideology, move a little bit in their convictions. Hey, you apply them with some money, they're willing to move a little bit more. They're willing to do speaking engagements for money. So many of these things just make sense when you look at the world around you. Do you really think every Christian pastor is white as the driven snow? No, clearly not. You, we've talked about my story in the past, right? How I was saved by a famous pastor back in the 80s, right? Jimmy Swaggart. And it was not long after I was saved, he got in a scandal. And so from the beginning, for me, I was very familiar with the idea that you should not idolize these church leaders. They make mistakes. It doesn't mean you should hate them, right? And so this book's not about hating people. It's about making you aware of what the state of our churches in the West are. So many of them are espousing these political ideas that are diametrically opposed to freedom of religion. That's been documented in many places and many times. Alexander Solzhenitsyn talks about this. Many other people who have been victims of communism and Marxism have talked about this. This is not some mystery. This is not some kind of weird belief that Marx was anti-religion. No, he was very clearly anti-religious, especially anti-Christian. So, to espouse these ideologies that are extreme, that lead to millions of deaths and have done so in history, and also hate Christianity, it's not a smart move, guys. And it's also likewise not a smart move to not listen to people like this when they give you warnings and they do all the hard work to write these books and provide the facts to back it up. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. If you're a believer and you are concerned with where the church appears to be going, maybe things have changed in the last 10 years. The book catalogs specific time period that these things appeared to be happening about 2015, 2016. It started, and there was a lot of new programs that entered many of these churches, headed by many of these men, and much of it is quite disturbing. So I can't go into all of it, but it would take a long time. But it's it's quite a good book. It was shocking to me to read it. Um, and I just wanted to recommend it. So that was my media experiences, as well as watching the news of houses getting flooded and people losing their livelihoods. That was my other media experiences in the last 2 weeks. So yeah, there we go.
Wow. That book sounds crazy.
Yeah, it's actually pretty good. It is really crazy though. I mean, you just would not. I mean, me, I do research on some pretty shocking things. So I read these things and I'm like, yeah, it sounds about right. But like to a lot of people, they're like, I can't believe this. Is my church one of these people who are
Hmm.
doing this? Some people claim, that most of the churches that are engaged in this are like evangelical churches. And so there's the whole discussion that enters into it. Is this a denominational problem? Is this Protestants who have a major issue? Like the truth is, if it was happening in Catholic or Orthodox churches, you might not even know about it. Like, but Protestants talk about this stuff. Like we really can complain about it, communicate about it. We have no problem if like a pastor's caught in some sexual sin. We have no problem plastering his name all over the news and saying, put this guy in prison. because that's just our philosophy. We believe we believe in
Yeah.
law and order. We believe in changing things up if things go bad. And I'm perfectly okay with that. I think that's a good thing. Like, let's make us think about it. So, but at the same time, right? How did Luther feel about the Catholic Church? He loved the Catholic Church. He wanted to stay in the Catholic Church, but he also had a problem with it, right? So I think it's good for us to be like that in general, right? Like if people wrong us and they make mistakes, it's like we should talk about it. We should resolve it. But it doesn't mean I hate your guts. Like it doesn't mean I want you out of my life, right? Like we can all fall into these problems and fall into this sin. This is another reason I don't understand when people push back against these books like Shepherds for Sale, because it's like, no, no, you don't understand. This is for your own good. If we fall into sin and we fall into trouble, it's good for us to talk about it openly, say, okay, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe this was an error. It's good for us to be humble enough to say, hey, I'm just a human being. Like all of us can be caught in some kind of sin. We might have some vulnerability. Some of us may have an addictive personality, right? Someone gave you drugs as a kid. Now you have a problem. You've got a problem the rest of your life. You have to stay away from alcohol or drugs or something, right? That's a weakness you have. It's better to face that weakness and accept it, right? And now you can have a better life because you're more aware of that weakness. You can provide protection to yourself and to others. You know, you can do the extra bit of work required to help keep you on the straight and narrow from here on out, right? Maybe prison is part of that. Maybe recovery, maybe going on rehab is part of that. And isn't that a good thing? Yeah, of course it is. So admitting you have a problem is is the first step, right, to solving that problem. And this is what Protestants believe in. We believe in going back on the straight and narrow, back on caring about your relationship with God and with your neighbor, loving your neighbor, because you getting help is part of loving your neighbor too. You know, if you've ever had a druggie in your family, everybody should know. Why? Because protect your purse. They'll take money from you, right? So they can get high. So, and isn't it wise for you to do that? So you're helping them stand the straight and narrow, and they all should also should be part of that work, you know? And then you can all make a joke about it next week. Who cares? You know, I've got my own mistakes too. I've got a mistake over here, you know, and you got a mistake over there, and that's fine. Like, let's get over it, like it's part of just growing up, you know. I mean, we have an autistic boy, right? So his whole life, it's like he's special. He's a little bit different. Does that make him less of a person? No, not at all. He's just different. We take special care with these things, right? And so everybody has that. Everybody has some kind of weird quirk, and you just talk about it and work through it. You're just patient with people. But that doesn't mean you know, shy away from the light to reveal these truths, you know? So what does John say in the Gospel of John? Like those who do not admit their sin, their sin remains. And why is it that we like to hide from the truth? Because we love our sin, right?
Hmm.
So we have to like admit, okay, well, maybe the reason I'm not facing the facts is because I actually do like doing this. I actually do like, and so you have to, that's another weakness. Just identify as a separate weakness. Okay, I'm a druggie. That's a problem. Number two, I like being a druggie. That's another problem, right? So identify both of them, so like now you can start identifying these issues and then you can create paths away from that. Start disliking yourself for liking drugs, right? Why am I a scumbag? Okay. Okay, then you can start getting to like approaching the issue of like staying dry, staying away from it, right? I'm just using that as an example. But like these are just, God loves us. And he even loves the most drug-addled, sin-corrupted one of us if we just are willing to have the conversation and be like, you know what? I don't know why I'm this way. I was just this happened to me as a kid or something, and it now I have this issue. And keep talking about it. Keep wondering about it. Keep trying to create ways out of it. So that's kind of what I think about when I read that book, because I was thinking about how it's like there's this problem in the church and it's gotten worse. And it's like, why wasn't the problem addressed in the beginning? Right. So when you think about these kind of like bigger issues, like a pattern you're seeing, or like some kind of like, some like it almost looks like a disease in the church, right? Um, well, you got to start thinking about why it's gotten so bad. Like how did that happen? And one of the big reasons is because we just weren't willing to talk about it like it's not a big deal. And like we're just normal human beings and we make mistakes. And so like just keep talking about it like that.
Yeah.
It's not about making light of it, like it doesn't matter. But in a way it is, right? In a way it's kind of like, well, we all have some issue we're dealing with, right? Um,
So
so
we think,
yeah.
so we see like, we feel like we see many churches becoming more and more progressive.
Hmm.
And my perspective on it was just kind of like, well, they're maybe being influenced, they're letting themselves be influenced by different ideas. But this book is saying that they might be financially um, influenced. They're being financially influenced
Well, yeah, they're being paid to do these things. Yeah.
to promote these ideas,
Yeah.
which is crazy because, if you're thinking, if you're looking, here you are, a pastor with access to the gospel and probably an education in which you were continually washed with scripture. And
Good luck with that. I don't think that's happening.
and well, I'm assuming a pastor has to have some kind of degree in order to be yeah, anyways.
Yeah, we could talk about that another time, but seminaries are often not great for learning about the Bible.
Uh, so so
Yeah,
here you are
I
and you
know.
have the good news
Hmm.
and you're like looking around for it and you're like, "Oh, maybe this is it over here, Marxism."
Right.
And you're like, "Well, Marxism sounds nice. People are kind or people
Oh,
are
nice.
um equal, treated equally. So
That's
maybe I should
the equally. Yeah.
maybe I should promote this.
Right.
Um, when here you have Jesus
The
Christ right
gospel.
here
Yeah.
in front of you, face to face with you, and they want something else because they haven't acknowledged Christ as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and they want something else. They're not fully satisfied with Christ. They haven't decided that they haven't realized that they can be satisfied by Christ. And they think, I don't really know what they think. Maybe just that religion is just a nice idea. And then vaguely, Jesus's teachings might a little bit line up with Marxism. Like some people say that, but
Now,
of course
Rebecca, I don't know if I like that tone.
it's not true when you really read the readings of Jesus, when you really get to know who Jesus is.
You're
I
acting like they should have already known this. And it's so horrible. It's another level of sin. It's just the most unbelievablest sin that they didn't see the obvious thing for you. It's so obvious. You know, I mean, I know. I hear you and I agree that it's kind of absurd, right? In a way. But we have to keep in mind that some people have been brought up in the church, and the church they've been brought up into, it wasn't always loving and kind and perfect, and the gospel wasn't always clearly presented. In fact, it might have been presented in a way that was not great, maybe a little corrupted, you know? Maybe it was about the kind of things I talk about sometimes, which is Gnostic. Maybe it was a little Gnostic. Maybe it was a little bit like meritorious. Maybe it was a little bit too much like about appearances, right?
Yeah.
And so I was talking about how like some people are brought up with a drug habit, right? And they were a kid and somebody gave them something and now they're addicted and they already have an addictive personality and all of this stuff. So it's like someone got handed a tough load of bricks to deal with. And now maybe they even feel resentful, or something. But also, we have to remember too, our educational institutions are loaded with Marxists. They're just loaded with these people, even seminaries. So this has been a long time, kind of long-term difficulty in our society where there's not even a lot of great academic facts supporting communism and Marxism, and yet they continue to like beat this drum, you know, and we have to remember that the way Marxism really got took root was through the intelligentsia, through the academics, through the artists, through, people who were very emotional, right? You were talking about equality. They know how to pull on the heartstrings. And who do you think is going to be more emotional? A religious person who's religious because they care about the least of these, or a person who's like a mathematician. They don't care, right? So it's the Christian, right, who was brought up in this church of like, we got to help the least of these. And then all they do is they go to college, and the college just illuminates more about this kind of like, there's different versions of this too. There's
Yeah.
there's the religious version of it, the progressive church version of it. There's the economics and the politics version of it. There's the community organizations. There's the anthropological version of it, of sociological, psychological version. There's the artistic from the artist's perspective. There's so many different schools of thought in the academy, in colleges that have been corrupted by this thinking. I mean, now they're talking about how 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4 necessarily, because it's oppressive to say it does, and it's too Western, right? So that's colonialism in the math in our math schools. And so, I mean, this is how corrupted it is. It's like just the idea that math is different in one country as it is from another. It's so ridiculous.
That's
Like,
just an analogy, right? You're not being
no,
literal.
no, 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 no. Oh no, it's not. You have to be steeped in it for so long that this becomes the most important thing to you. It is a cult. This is why they're calling it a cult now. It's such an ideology that's so powerful. People will set aside all their other beliefs, all their other knowledge, all their facts, you know. And religious people can be very, actually can be very vulnerable to this kind of attack. Because for us, the heart matters a lot more than math, quite often, you know. And here I am an artist, but like as a conservative, I'm a rare person. Like most artists are like straight up, you know, progressive, you know. I mean, Hollywood is full of these people. So, for them, they think it's compassionate, you
Yeah.
know. They think that sticking it to the man and, since has been a phrase since the 70s, and like today's version of it is making the rich pay their fair share. Like that's today's version of it. Fair share. This is your fair share, you know. But who decides what is fair and what is that person's share of what is fair? But who is that person? Is it fair for them to be that person? What if those people are not fair people? What if they're not fair minded? What if they actually do hate the rich? And if they do hate the rich, the fair share has become quite large. Well, you got to pay it because I say so. Right. So it can get kind of ridiculous when you think of it that way, because these are the planners, right? Marxism and communism is always run by the planners, and the planners plan everything. They plan how much this is going to cost, how much you can charge for it. It's called pricing controls. How much you deserve at this job. What's the minimum wage? They decide all of that. They just arbitrarily decide it. There's no other criteria that has to be met. You just trust these people implicitly. And how are you going to stop them if they ever go off the rails? We just seen over and over and over in communist Russia and in other countries. How are you going to stop them? You can't stop them. Once you open the door to that and let it in, it's like demon possession. You can't just stop it then. And they just keep believing these lies in our colleges, which are no longer about facts. They're literally calling facts colonial oppression. Like, you know, how we were talking about math. If you're on time and punctual, that's colonialism. I'm not joking. No joke. You probably need to see that movie, Am I Racist now? Because that also talks about this a little bit. And it's likewise disturbing, like this book. So yeah, I appreciate what these people are doing. I think it's good for us to hear the truth. I'm not one of these flat earthers who believe you should just not listen to new ideas. You shouldn't listen to the truth about what they think is going on. And if these things really are happening, that's something has to be done about that. So, that's Shepherds for Sale, and quite shocking. But what we're going to talk about tonight, and I know we don't have a ton of time, but um, I thought it was great because in the car we have a CD player, and so we were playing some CDs we don't normally get to play. And they talked about all the different incredible epic poetry through the years. We're not going to talk about like drill in too much to each one. But let's see if I can remember all the ones they talked about. Let's see. They talked about, of course, the classic, the first, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then the Aeneid, which is the Roman version. And then there's let's see, Beowulf. There is um Dante's Inferno, which is the Divine Comedy. Um then there's um pretty much the
Did they talk about Pilgrim's Progress?
they didn't, but I was gonna bring that up. They talked about Paradise Lost.
Mm.
Um I think there was one other one. Oh yeah, the Fairy Queen, Edmund Burke's Fairy Queen. So I have never read the Fairy Queen. It made me very curious to read it because it has Saint George is talked about in it. Or no way, is it Arthur? Um, or is it both? I don't remember. Uh, but yeah, the Fairy Queen. So I need to read that one at some point. But what I was really struck by, it's obviously, again, it rekindled my love of the Greek and the Iliad and the Odyssey, but it reminded me that the Aeneid is pretty great, the Roman one.
Mm.
And it identified as it comes to the difference between the Roman version, the Roman story and the Greek, these two Greek ones. The Greek ones seem more like artistic and passionate and strange. And the Aeneid feels more like almost like a blueprint for society or a blueprint for how you're supposed to behave. It's more like about being a responsible person, right? And it feels more intentional, right? And those are all things I like. Like I like the fact that the Aeneid was more like about being less passionate, more about being a good citizen. And I really admire that. Like I really think that's pretty cool. That differentiated the Roman from the Greek a little bit. And it kind of gives the Romans their character apart from Greece. It's like, no, we are good planners, we're good administrators, we're good at order, law and order, we're good at a lot of things. And so I kind of thought that was pretty cool. When we get to Beowulf, one thing I didn't realize about Beowulf was that it is actually from a Christian perspective. I actually didn't know that. I thought Beowulf was completely pagan, but it wasn't. And one of the things that the teacher spoke about in the course was like the reason that they believe he was a Christian was because he knew books. He knew writing and books, was clearly familiar with other stories that came before them. And how does the pagan world get books and get learning and get reading and writing? They don't unless they become Christians. Christianity spread literary knowledge. It spread being able to read and write. And so that was just a good reminder
Cool.
that Judaism and Christianity spreads knowledge
Yeah,
and truth and intellectual ability. And so most of these epic tales, uh, besides the Greek and Roman, are Christians. So, um, this really says something about Western civilization, doesn't it? Um, and then, past Beowulf, there's another thing about the Beowulf. I thought it was pretty interesting because it contained within it a lot of the Christian ethic, but also a lot of the Germanic, the Viking vibe was still in it, which is that they had more of a pessimistic view about life in many ways. To the Viking, it was more about, well, we're probably going to just die anyway. And so if that's true, then so be it, you know. And they have a lot more of a pessimistic vibe. It's more of a tragedy, right? Um, and even though the comedy came from Christians, the positive outlook came from Christians, um, which is another reason Dante's comedy is so great. Um, so going to Dante's comedy then, Commedia, many people still proclaim Dante's Commedia as the greatest literary work ever. And so I've read a little bit of it, but not very much of it. I do like the language used. I do like what's said. There's just so many like references of his time. And it's like I have to do like multiple courses just on Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, and
Yeah.
Paradiso, just so I can get a cursory understanding of the
Yeah.
depth of his work. Because just like how I was talking to you about the that bird story from before,
Yeah.
I tend to read stuff in order to create an adaptation
Yeah.
or to like create my own version of that thing,
Yeah.
which I really have a lot of personal passion for and put a lot of personal energy into. And so for me, it's like I want to understand the Divine Comedy so that I can adapt it into a series
Yeah.
or into three movies. That just to me would be just the cat's meow. So,
Yeah. Hmm.
you know,
Probably would be good if there was a commentary where,
yes,
you could read it and there would be notes at the bottom
right.
or
Or somebody would explain it to you.
paragraphs inserted or something. He's
Yeah.
referring to this guy or this
Well, you
event.
know
And
me, like I like to watch YouTube videos, so I have probably watched almost every YouTube video I can find on Dante's Inferno and Purgatorio. And I mean, sure, there's stuff out there that's like has had 5 views and the algorithm just doesn't give it to me. But like everything I can find that's any good, I've probably already watched on the Divine
yeah,
Comedy. And it's just great. I mean, it's just wonderful. And I do think we need that story again. But here's the thing about Dante's comedy. It's so obvious, right? It has to be adapted to today's period. Has to,
yeah,
because so many of the references are about Christendom of that time.
yeah,
And so most of these references, like in order for us, the reader, to understand that we got to do all this research, right? The real problem is that you're going to have to adapt it for the modern audience to understand what Dante's trying to say. And in order to understand what Dante's trying to say, you kind of have to have a modern version of Dante. You have to have a modern kind of person
yeah,
who makes references that the modern person would understand. So it's the equivalent of Dante for today. And so that's really what you need is you need somebody to speak in that same kind of conservative voice that Dante had, where he loved his local community, he loved his Florence, he loved and he loved the Pope, but he had issues. He had disagreements. Like there were things that um, the politics of his day, there's no one-to-one comparison to today. Like today, it's just very different. But what would Dante say about today? Right. And so he might take positions that we think are just really strange today. And I think that would be a good thing to see in art, a good thing to see, and what kind of punishments would be found in the Inferno. Would they be the same as they were depicted in his story? Would they be something different? And with the technology we have today, what other kind of imaginary kind of like um torturing devices could exist in the Dante's mind of today, you know? And so there's a lot that could be modified to today, but I really think that people need to hear Dante today, hear what he would have to say about our society. Like, who would he judge, right? Harshly. And who would he be like, whatever, you know, you're forgiven. I mean, in many ways, this is the problem with that kind of story, right? It's like, who are you to judge, Dante? You know, but like many people who don't understand, who condemn Christians for judging, me- half of them don't even understand that whole doctrine. They don't understand the fact that Christians, a lot of Christians that judge are perfectly justified to judge. Why? It's in the Bible. So that means it's not them judging. It's God judging through the Bible. And they're just letting you know that. They're just letting you know what the Bible says. And so therefore this person should be judged. So take it up with the Bible, take it up with God. He wrote the Bible. So I'm just letting you know what it says. You know, this is not controversial or strange in Christian circles at all. This is just totally normal, you know? And we can all be judged in some way, right? So yeah, Dante is interesting, and but it is quite a vast work. It's kind of like more vast and encompassing than Pilgrim's Progress. So we can talk about that next, because even though they didn't talk about Pilgrim's Progress in this story, and he I don't know if he's a contemporary of John Milton of um Paradise Lost, but he might have been. Um, I actually think John Milton was on the opposite side of the. No, wait, I think they were both Protestants. So I take that back. I think that they were both Protestants, English Protestants, during the Civil War period of England when Cromwell took over. So they both were engaged in making these epic works. Um, they didn't reference Pilgrim's Progress in this course, but I think that they should have. It's true that it's not epic in the same way because it's not really poetry, right? It's very allegorical, which is fine. You can be allegorical and be epic poetry. Um, but it's you could say it's a little more um straightforward in some ways, the way it's written. And that's again the poetry element of it, right? Poetry, often you're enraptured in this language that really transports you, right? And John Bunyan doesn't really do that. He's pretty straightforward, and he has a lot of dialogue also. John Bunyan has a lot of dialogue. So sometimes it can get kind of stuffy and wordy and not very lyrical like poetry.
Yeah.
But but his plot, his story is very similar to, I would say, Dante's Inferno in many ways, because it's a journey out of, right, out of hell in many ways, into heaven. And so, and there's these personal relationships as well that are always visited. So it's a man's personal journey out of hell into heaven. And he's dealing with his past relationships, which obviously, Dante's Virgil, and he's got all these relationships he's navigating. Some people he has relationships with in real life, ends up in hell in his story, so he's condemning those people. Other people he loves dearly, like Beatrice. And so these people have a profound influence on him. And these are real people that were in Dante's life. So it's not true that John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress, included all the personal relationships in his story. But what he did instead is gave people interesting names, right? And said, oh, this is Mr. Fortitude, or this is Mr. Um, whatever. Insert sinful behavior.
Yeah.
And these are people he might have known in real life, and was inspired to write about them. And then he put them in his story and just changed their name and made them this cartoonish version of like this extreme behavior, right? But by doing that, it wasn't like Dante. It wasn't an effort necessarily to judge people. It was more of a didactic instructional purpose to say, this is how you deal with legalistic people. This is how you deal with people who just talk and they never act. Or this is how you deal with people who are persecutors and try to harm people or violent people. This is how you deal with those people, all on your journey to heaven. And so that's, I think, quite special in Pilgrim's Progress. I think it's probably the best part of Pilgrim's Progress, the instructive quality to it, besides just the visualizations and interesting battles he goes through, that Christian goes through. But the reason I wanted to bring up Pilgrim's Progress as well with all these is because it's the best-selling Christian book outside the Bible.
Mm.
So it's like
Yeah.
clearly it's popular and should be mentioned, and the fact that you know of the epic quality of the story. It's not poetry, but it's certainly epic and worthy to talk about. In fact, as you remember, I'm sure I was developing a Pilgrim's Progress. I was I had various names for it, but I didn't want to call it Pilgrim's Progress. I wanted to call it something like the Pilgrim's Path, or just Pilgrim,
Mm-hmm.
or something like this. And it was going to be probably a series.
Mm-hmm.
And at first was developing a movie, and it was just very unwieldy. And I was like, oh, this needs to be a series because it's just too going to be too difficult to do this all in one sitting. There's too many different locations. There's too many different characters and different scenes that often seem very disparate and separate from one another. And so having it placed in episodes is a far better way aesthetically to explain the difference of all these different scenes. It just streamlines things in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that allows you to also, like separate and itemize each episode. Like you could do it in like 8 or 10 episodes And sure, it could be expensive because of the locations and the sets and the costumes and the effects, but like, wow, it would be worth it to do that. So, um, after Pilgrim's Progress, and the last one we'll talk about is Paradise Lost, and I was very impressed with the background of John Milton. I was impressed with his language, and I often when I hear people talk about these things, um, I can kind of make up my mind about that person. Like, I don't think I agree with them on everything. And with this teacher, there was things I did not always agree with him on. And clearly he was not a Christian, for example. Um, and I think he succumbed to a lot of the modern complaints about John Milton in that like often when there's like a Christian and they're doing something great, you'll see that people who are not Christians they give them the short end of the stick quite often, and they don't give them credit for things they do good at also. And those are often clear giveaways. You're like, ah, I can understand what's happening here. And so because this teacher, he read segments of almost every one of these epic poems, and I found John Milton's to be the most beautiful. And yet that was the very same thing that he came down on it for. Isn't that curious?
For being too beautiful.
Well, he said the way he worded it was many people have complained about his language because of such and such reason. It had nothing to do with the aesthetic qualities of it. It was something that it was not related to
Yeah.
that. And so it's like some academics were like, I don't know if I like this. And many of these complaints stick in the academic world, because why would he even bring it up if it didn't stick? And so, but when he read John Milton, I was like, this is the most heavenly of all of them I have heard. And one of the things that they complained about, this is so funny, this is so hilarious. And to them, it's probably not hilarious, but for me, as a reader of epic poetry, the first bit of epic poetry of this I had read was the Greco-Roman stuff, Iliad, Odyssey, and Aeneid. And it has a certain meter to it, right? It's epic poetry. It has a certain meter to it. Well, Latin and the Romance languages have a different structure to their sentences than English. English is ordered differently, right? So often you have the subject in English first, and then what the subject does, right? And in many languages, it's different. It's reversed, right? And so their complaint about John Milton was that he would pick whether to reverse it or put it in the proper English order because he wanted to play with the language. And I'm like, how is this a complaint? He's
Mhm.
drawing from his masters. He's drawing from the Greeks and the Latins, the Romans. So he's willing to change the language to make it more flourishing and more beautiful and more rich. And when you read it, it actually comes off well. It comes off like a song. That's beautiful. So the very thing that I think John Milton was the most brilliant at, which was playing with the English language to make it sound like a song, was the thing that they didn't like. So I just thought that that was quite funny. Because like he reads it and it's just incredibly beautiful. And then he's like, some people have said they don't like the way he mixes it up. I'm like, you just proved that it's beautiful, right? And if you read John Milton, you'll probably get what I what I'm talking about here, but I wish I had prepared a reading, but it's just really impressive work. And so I really need to read all of Paradise Lost. And also I thought it was cool that he was a Puritan, and the Puritans were kind of hated by this time. And so but his philosophy was just very clear and very interesting, and it gave me healthy respect for the Puritans, even though they were not perfect, and sometimes
Yeah.
they kind of messed up I don't want to say they like it's just the Puritans, but like the Protestants of that day in England kind of messed up the revolution in the UK with Cromwell. I guess they were like a little too harsh or something. I don't know, but there's a reason that there's a monarchy again in the UK after that happened. But like they screwed it all up. But but now they have Anglicanism and what seems to be a healthy compromise between Protestant and Catholic.
Yeah.
Um, so that's, I guess maybe that's a good thing that came out of it. But um,
When
yeah,
when I was listening to that first part of it with you, um, he mentioned the teacher who was teaching the class that there had been an attempt to make an American epic poem
yes,
about what
there
was
was
it
a few.
about?
There was a few, but I don't remember the legend. There was a legend, maybe Daniel Boone or something.
I think it was Boone. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it
Daniel.
was Daniel Boone, a Daniel Boone story. I just don't get these American heroes like that. I just, like, I don't know. I don't get it. But I do like I like the Pocahontas one. I think that that one's fairly decent. But none of them strike me as anything like Saint George or so many
Mm,
of the other old heroes of Christendom. Like none of them to me have that kind of
yeah,
beauty, you know? They're kind of like virile men who were supposed to be like taming the West. I'm
yeah.
like, once you tame the West, now what is that going to mean? Well, how is that going to communicate to people about what life's about?
Mm,
So it's just like about manifest destiny, and that's it.
mm,
Like there's got to be more to life than that. But this is a lot of the reason I don't like a lot of the American um, stories that are
yeah.
uniquely American. If they're about something else, like let's say the guys from UK, the Inklings, like we talk about Mythopoeia sometimes. I mean, if it's somebody like that who's like talking about something above and beyond, like some other world or some fantasy or sci-fi, like that to me is certainly there's plenty of American authors that are great like that, you know, but nothing like the epic poetry of the olden days. I think he said in the course that it's like been like 300 years since a good
Mm.
epic poem, 2 or 300 years. Um, so
Well, I think
it's
the
got to
word
be
ep,
me. I'm gonna have to do it. Nobody else can
yeah.
do it, you know.
Well, that's where I was headed. I was headed with that, what's
Yeah,
the next American or what's the great American epic? But I think to me,
it's an
and
ordeal.
I haven't really read any of these, but I did read a poetic retelling of Pilgrim's Progress. Um, and I think what makes them epic is that they're not just dealing with legendary creatures
Right.
or supernatural creatures, but they're dealing with the realms of life and death, and they're dealing with eternal subjects.
Yeah.
Like the Greek ones, the Iliad and the Odyssey, they're talking with the gods and the goddesses. And,
Yeah.
things are very
The stakes can be
epic.
high. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like if we had a modern one, the very nature of it being modern makes it not epic.
Right. Right. Yeah. The world has become a small place
Yeah.
since you can fly around the world in a few days.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody can talk to each other on their Google translators,
Yeah.
and you can look at some kind of live camera on the other side of the planet that's
Yeah.
giving you a live feed. Like it makes the world a very small, insignificant place that you think you can control with the touch of a mouse, you know. It's kind of silly, you know.
I
I
mean,
mean,
I
I
suppose,
we need these stories that make the world a big, unwieldy,
yeah.
like universally misunderstood place. That's just like what's going on. So this is why we talk about fairy tales sometimes, because I
Yeah.
think fairy tales do that quite well.
Well, mystery.
Yeah.
We don't feel like we have any mystery right now in the modern age. We can explain everything.
Yeah. Of course, all of our explanations are kind of daft,
Mhm.
but we think they're so good. That sounded so good to me. I'm gonna post it on Twitter. So important. Like again, we're just making all this stuff ubiquitous and useless and available to everybody. It just takes all of the gusto out of it. Like it just takes all of the value out of it, you know? So yeah, I think that these epic poems really speak to a bygone era, but that bygone era doesn't have to be gone. We can see once again the universal mystery of the world, like the the dark, unknowable things can haunt us once again.
Yeah, the unknown land.
Yeah, and we don't have to feel like just because we don't know things that there's something wrong with us. That's not a bad place to be in, really. Like our kids know a lot. They're homeschooled, they have quite a bit. They have the Ambleside, right? They have a lot of knowledge. But like I think we're training them up well when we can say something like, you don't need to know that now. And they're just like, okay,
Yeah,
good job. Because that means that they're trusting us for that at the right time in the right place. That's what we all need for with God. Like
yeah,
we all need to exhibit that attitude with God when God's like, things are going to change, or this is going to happen, or you might have to evacuate from a hurricane. You might lose everything, right? Just like how
yeah.
we opened up the conversation talking about Milton, John Milton. Now you got the Hurricane Milton. It's one of the reasons I was thinking about John Milton a lot, the hurricane. But we can just be like, well, it's up to you, God. I trust it in your hands. You're our Father. You care about us. You can
Yeah,
provide what we need. If we lose everything, you've got an answer for us. You've got a direction for us to go in,
yeah,
you know? And
absolutely.
it's also why part of my fatherhood philosophy is to teach my kids that they don't own anything.
Mm,
They don't own anything. We own all of their stuff. We own their clothes, their toys, everything. They're just there to manage it, right?
mm,
They fulfill our ask. We ask them to treat those things a certain way. And when they fulfill that duty, then they get to keep those things and play with them and have more things.
yeah.
This is exactly how God treats us,
Mm,
right? And this is how, when he says, you have the kingdom, this is how that's true. We all have the kingdom. His kingdom, his planet, all of the things he creates, all the animals and the plants, and these things are all ours, right? On condition of what? We manage them well. We just have to be good little administrators, you know. And as we do that, as we show love to the animals we get in our care, or the children, or the goods and or things, the resources that God gives us, as we manage them well, he just gives us more. You can manage more stuff now. You've been faithful with few things. Now I'll make you, you know,
Yeah.
leader of many things. You can own many things now. Own,
Yeah.
right? Do any of us really ever own our things? Really? Like a hurricane could just come by and take it all. Did
One
you
of my
really
favorite
own that thing? Maybe
one
not.
of my favorite verses is the earth is the Lord's and everything in it.
All of it. So we got to get more used to like letting things go. Because if we can't, when that thing is taken away from us, and there's a good chance it could be for many of us, when that thing is taken away, we can get really, hold on to it. And this is painful to us. God doesn't want us to feel this kind of pain. He wants us to hold these things lightly, like a little bird just landing on. It's beautiful when it's there, but you got to let it go. You can't hold on to it
Yeah.
and keep it, right? Hold on to its little leg. What's that going to do? He's just going to peck you. Ow, right? You can't hold on to it. You got to just let that beauty go. God gave you a moment to experience it. And you're going to be like, God. No, that was a great moment. Enjoy it. So this kind of ownership thing is kind of silly. Um, he wants us to be good managers. As we manage things well, we get more things. He just wants us to learn more and have that experience. And so I like to give my children that kind of philosophy. It makes them less want things, less about things, right? Having things. It's more about just like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to orient myself to these things responsibly. And then when they get older and they have things, like I'm going to give them more things as they get older. And then eventually there are going to be things where I'm like, this is yours. It's yours, you know? But the point was to teach them the philosophy first. And then later, when I say this is yours, I kind of want them to look at me like, mine really? Or am I just supposed to be watching this thing? Like, no, you can have it, you know? And so it's like just like a graduating, like you're graduating into more responsibility. And so now that they've got this philosophy under their belt, when they get older and they lose things, or bad things happen to them, or things break, or their things get lost, they're less like, oh, they're more like, it's okay. I did my thing with it. I was responsible, I treated it well. And if I didn't, well, maybe I should do that better now. Dad taught
Yeah.
me to do this, so I have to do that thing. And eventually you get the kingdom, right? And it's all ours. We're not going to abuse it, because why? Because of the principle that it's about your relationship with God. For my kids, it's their relationship with me, right? If that relationship's going well, they're going to get more things, you know? Why wouldn't I want them to? So all of us too, we're going to get the kingdom. I'm doing church again. We do this a lot, I know.
Yay.
But It's the truth. The truth is eventually comes out, right? That's just the truth. But yeah, so these kids, if you got kids, teach them epic poetry.
Yeah.
It's great stuff, man. It's great stuff. Some of the best stories ever. So now with these epic poems, I'm like resonating to each one. I'm like, oh, this is great stuff. It's interesting to see the growth of our epic poetry, how it's changed.
Yeah.
But I'm far more interested in Paradise Lost than I was before. And I'm also more interested because of this in Pilgrim's Progress because I really like Dante's Inferno, but I realized that Pilgrim's Progress is shorter, it's more succinct, and it's got just as interesting moments as Dante's Inferno in it. It's just not as epic, right? But it's like it's something that's more achievable in film or TV than Dante's Inferno, which is so like, wow, so
Yeah.
expansive. So it kind of encourages me to work on those two, the Pilgrim's Progress and Paradise
Paradise.
Lost. And then I want to get back into the Greek and Roman stuff again because it's going to inspire the hoplite more. I just want to
Yeah.
use that to inspire the hoplite and also to help me do research on C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces
Yeah.
because his stuff was a lot inspired, obviously, by old Greek mythology, and that's pretty cool. So that's another good one to read. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but it's like it just appears to be a masterpiece. So
Yeah.
you've
Uh,
read that one, right?
Yeah, I read it probably about 10 years ago, I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And I really liked it.
Yeah,
It's way more mature than some of his other stories. And I don't mean like adult, I mean just like
no,
emotionally
yeah,
mature.
right.
And
It's like a George McDonald type story, you think? Because his stuff, I think of it as very mature.
yeah, I suppose you could say that. It's a little dark,
Mm-hmm.
or like it felt sad to me.
Right.
Um, but it's very good.
Yeah. How would you say it compares to Lilith? Lilith. Um,
Um, Lilith, let's see. Lilith is a lot more exciting.
yeah,
And then it feels more like an adventure story.
right.
There's a lot of things going on, a lot of different characters, a lot of places, a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
And Till We Have Faces from my memory felt like something crazy happens in the beginning, and then the rest of the book feels like contemplating what happened and why that happened. And
Right.
um, that was the impression I got from
A
it.
lot of kind of ruminating and
Yeah.
you wouldn't go to the point of saying navel gazing, would you? Just kind of like feeling sorry for yourself, or is it more like
No.
interesting conversations? How would you portray that? Or
Um, I don't know. There's a character who um winds up becoming queen, I think, and she hides her face with a veil,
Mhm.
and um because she's not good looking at all.
Right,
And but and hiding her face with a veil gets her more um attention and fame. Um Something happens to her sister at the very beginning of the story that she can't handle. Like she finds it so disturbing. And then throughout the rest of the story, it's just kind of her life. And it's very Greek. It's
Yeah,
just very like, pagan. And it's almost like at the end, the conclusion is just that she feels resentful towards the gods for taking away her
right,
sister.
right.
I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. Um,
This is why I compared it in my head to Pendragon cycle,
mhm.
because that's kind of a lot of what happens in the Pendragon cycle
Okay,
is yeah, is and we should talk about that at some point. But you should probably listen to the audiobook or read it some point. It's good.
cool.
Not as
Okay.
good as C.S. Lewis, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But like the character Carice, Caris, I guess you could call her. She comes from the old Atlantean pagan world, that it was a different kind of pagan. Um, and then she comes into, the old English um world, which is before it becomes English, really. It's like right after the Romans leave, right before all the Vikings come, basically.
Mm.
And so they're dealing with all the Vikings that might come, and they're dealing with the local warlords, you know. And she has a pagan experience, and then she didn't like it. But it was kind of like, why did I like it before and now I don't like it? Like why was I okay with it before and now I'm like, this is dumb. Like this is not, you know what I mean? Like she comes to the realization of the emptiness of paganism. And
Mm.
then when she goes into um old world UK Christendom, right? Which
Hmm.
is really early on. Um, we're talking maybe, I don't know, 400 AD, 300 AD, like really old Dark Ages stuff. And which is kind of a cool time, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so she experiences Christianity there and becomes a Christian. And so there is a lot of like that was the old, this is the new in that
Mm.
story. So it's kind of interesting in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't get a lot of stories talking about that era and that kind of, it's almost like a St. George type
Yeah.
story, you know, except kind of almost post-Roman, you know. It was only post-Roman in the UK. The Roman Empire still existed, but it's like um it's not, it's almost like post-Roman in England.
Yeah.
So this is like it's a very interesting story. I like that. But yeah, there's just so many great tales that are meaningful, not like today's stories, which are all about spectacle and
Mm.
not about anything meaningful about real life.
Yeah.
These stories are endlessly interesting and powerful, often beautiful, um, and culturally impactful. Like they carry the values of that culture very clearly in these stories. And so that means you're going to be learning a lot when you read these stories.
Yeah.
You're going to learn about that culture, what they believe. Um, Today, you just don't get that. You know, you get a lot of subversive stories today, stories that are always trying to subvert culture. So it's like, what is your culture even about? It's like all these divided, separate groups that are just kind of hating on each other. That's pretty strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, so any other thoughts before we wrap it up?
I love this subject matter. This is great. Classic literature,
Yeah,
epic.
yeah, I'm hoping we can dig into one or two of these in the future.
Yeah, that
That'd be
sounds
great.
great.
Yeah. All right. So, where can people find you, Rebecca?
You can find me on Facebook at Rebecca Loves Jesus and on YouTube at Rebecca Loves Jesus and on Substack at Jesus at uh, just Rebecca Croft at
You're,
Substack.
you're looking tired.
A little
And
tired.
I'm on at John Edward Croft. I'm at Cultural Warfare with John Croft, and I'm at the Media Moses on X and on YouTube and Instagram. So, and you can find my writing at mediamoses.com. I'm hoping to do more writing soon. I've been kind of out of the game for a few weeks, and with all the hurricanes going on, so we're back and trying to get back to business. So love you guys and stand up for the culture. All right, guys. We'll see you next week.